Hello and welcome to the Debrief live here on the Blood Red channel. I'm Guy Clarke. Alongside me, Matt Addison, and we're here to react to Liverpool going down 2-1 to Manchester United at Old Trafford. Not the result the Reds were looking for at all. Still awaiting that first Premier League win of the season. And just to make it taste even worse, Matt, defeat at Old Trafford.
Yeah, it couldn't really get much worse than that, could it? I think Liverpool were absolutely dreadful to a man individually, collectively tonight. It just didn't work at all. I think, the really worrying thing for me is this pattern now that we've seen. The last time Liverpool took the lead in a competitive game was April. It's just not good enough, really. I think the excuses are easy to come up with, the injuries, and I'm sure the midfield will get pointed to. I'm sure, transfers and all the rest of it. But, fundamentally, the players who were out there just didn't really seem to perform tonight. And yeah, it was a real shock. I'm not quite sure what was more of a shock, really, the way that Liverpool performed or the way that Manchester United performed. I think they were excellent, but at the same time, you've got to kind of go into these games expecting a bit of a reaction, really, from them, from their crowd. After what happened last week, all of that criticism, they were always going to start fast, and it was up to Liverpool, really, to match that, and they just didn't do that. They started badly, didn't particularly get going at all. They had one or two moments at the end of each half, but nothing really sustained and nothing really convincing. And yeah, it's becoming a real concern now, I think, because it was the back end of last season, the start of this season. It was pretty similar to the game at Fulham that we saw on the opening day. And again, there was a couple of mitigating circumstances around that, but for tonight to go to Old Trafford and perform like that, there's just really no excuse.
Yes, 7 Premier League games in a row now that Liverpool have conceded the opening goal and really giving themselves a mountain to climb when that does happen. CJ says could have given Liverpool an extra hour of extra time and they wouldn't have scored. Ponderous. We want you to get involved in the comments section and the chat box. So do that through the course of the show. We will get to it. Matt, as you say, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of talk about midfielders and potential work that could yet be done in the transfer window. But as CJ says there, ponderous, I think it's a pretty good adjective to describe the whole night for Liverpool.
Yeah, just, all over the pitch. As I said, I'm sure that the midfield is going to be the big question, and I'm sure that's what Jurgen Klopp will get asked about, and that's going to be the kind of overriding narrative, I think, for the rest of the week. But just all the way through the pitch, you look at Virgil van Dijk. He started the season really, really poorly, and it was uncharacteristic against Fulham to give away the penalty in the way that he did, but he's just continued with the same sort of thing, really, since then. You look at the two fullbacks. Trent, in particular, was absolutely all over the place today, and it's not been the easiest place for him to go at times, but again, just didn't make the right decisions, seemed to be going long a lot. Liverpool just couldn't really keep the ball, and then you go into that midfield, they seem to just knock the ball from back to front, give it back to Manchester United so easily. I thought Harvey Elliott was okay. I think he was maybe a bit more of a bright spark than maybe the rest of his teammates, similar to last Monday night, really. It was maybe the least worst is maybe a little bit harsh to say for him. I thought he was okay at certain times tonight, but he's trying to make passes, he's trying to create things within a team that is just really, really static. And again, another common theme really over the last 3 games, what we've seen. Obviously, it's going to take time. The evolution, the loss of Sadio Mane, the new forwards that Liverpool have brought in. It's going to take a little bit of time for them to kind of gel together and work together. But it's just not going to happen if they're that far apart. You saw Diaz on one touchline, Salah on the other. Roberto Firmino just completely went missing for the entire game. It looked like he was kind of playing in a defensive midfield too with Jordan Henderson for most of it. It just looked completely disjointed. And when Liverpool are at their best, they're all sort of close together, those forwards. They're interchanging, they're passing, they're working off each other. We saw that a little bit with Darwin Núñez on the opening day, and obviously the link up with Mohamed Salah. But tonight, it just didn't work again. The midfield didn't work. The forward line didn't work. It just looked completely disjointed. And yeah, Manchester United looked the better team tonight, which I don't really think you can say anything more damning than that than Liverpool. It was a question not just of quality, but the kind of character and desire and intensity and all of those words that over the last couple of seasons have just been an absolute given that Liverpool would turn up and perform and put in that running and put in that effort. And they just haven't done it again today. It was lackluster, I think, to say the very least.
Yeah, I'm with you in terms of, I think Liverpool beat themselves as much as Manchester United beat them. I thought first half an hour, Man United came out flying, and they were going to after what happened to them at Brentford, and Liverpool were caught in somewhat of a whirlwind with that. But after half an hour, I don't think United offered an awful lot, or didn't need to offer an awful lot, without Liverpool really being able to do much themselves. Warrior says we didn't play football in the first half. We need to change our tactics. It's an absolute disgrace. Also, stubborn FSG need to wake up. Also, why is Klopp accepting the injury-prone midfielders? As you said, Matt, you can understand that a lot of people dissatisfied. Horrible game from Liverpool. Embarrassing. Question here: is Naby really injured, or did he bottle it without showing up? Because if so, get rid. I mean, there were a lot of questions and a lot of finger pointing going on here. Klopp's making a lot of mistakes, and despite the praise that Liverpool have rightly earned and got over the last few years, the start of this season isn't going to plan.
No, and the questions are only going to increase, aren't they? The pressure on sort of the transfer market and the rest of it is all going to come into play. I mean, we are 3 games in, and you don't want to panic. There will be players coming back, and Liverpool will get better this season. It's not a case really of that being a concern, but I think it is, getting to that point now where if Liverpool drop another couple of points in the next 3 or 4 games, you are already talking about, the possibility of it not really being a title chase, but a top 4 chase.
I was going to say on that, for me, you probably look at it and you say the title race is off until it's on. No, I mean 7 points. The difference is no. City have got themselves 7 points. 5 points the difference between the two sides. I mean, you're already looking at Liverpool having to win home and away against City to get themselves ahead of them at this rate. I mean, I know it's only 3 games in and it's drastic to say something like that, but to me, it kind of feels as though Liverpool need to get their house in order before worrying about what the rest are all doing.
Yeah, exactly. You can't look at Manchester City at the moment. I know they dropped points this weekend, but they certainly looked a lot more cohesive, and they seem to have settled in the signings that they've had over the summer much more quickly than what Liverpool obviously have. And I don't know, it's just a real issue. I mean, the comment there I think is spot on. You look at the bench, you look at ways of changing what Liverpool were doing there, and I don't think it was a bad decision or a surprising decision that Fabinho didn't start, but then almost as soon as he doesn't, then there's question marks of when's he going to come on. When he did come on, didn't play particularly well, and I think there wasn't really much else to turn to. Fabio Carvalho was there, but it's a lot to ask of him to come on and change the game. I think he did really well. I thought he looked pretty decent actually as well in the Crystal Palace match when he came on and had that shot late on, which could have changed. And it's just one of those things where you looked at that bench, and I think they did it on Sky actually on the TV. They panned down to the Liverpool bench and just sort of said, well, who do you turn to? You've got a couple of centre halves there, young players as well. You've got a 17-year-old Bobby Clarke who was playing for the under-21s over the weekend. You've got 1 or 2 players in there that realistically were never ever going to come off the bench unless Liverpool were 6 and 7-0 up, which was obviously not going to happen again after what happened last season. I mean, they just weren't going to come on and weren't obviously the right players to bring on in the situation that Liverpool found themselves in. I mean, the Naby Keita comment from before, that was the line is that he's injured, but again, I can understand the kind of question marks around that given the speculation. It was kind of inevitable really in terms of those question marks being asked, but I don't know. It's going to take more than Naby Keita to turn Liverpool's season around. I think at this moment in time, they just didn't look like they were ready to play that match, and that's the biggest thing for me. We talk about mentality monsters. Pep Blinders never stops going on about intensity. That's his favourite word, but they're just yet to show that really so far this season. That's the first thing. I don't think it's necessarily one player was missing or one player was at fault today. It just wasn't. It wasn't a good performance from start to finish.
I mean, Samir is good in touch now. I think the Premier League trophy's out of our hands. Need to focus on top 4 and Champions League, sadly. I mean, after 3 games, it is incredible that kind of that is the level of where Liverpool are at. But as you say, it kind of is the focus. And yeah, you don't want to kind of get too panic stations about it 3 games into the course of the season. The transfer window is still open, as you can imagine. The comment section absolutely being flooded with Liverpool needing a midfield arrival, but it's not quite the way that Liverpool operate. I mean, to go now in the market would be a huge surprise and a huge change of kind of scenario and a model in which how Liverpool operate. There is clearly comments sort of labelling how other sides have come into the division this year, lower sides than Liverpool in the Premier League table, and are spending more money in the transfer market. But that's not always the case. I think the worry, Matt, is the fact that Sadio Mane's gone out of the team. Yes, Thiago's injured. Yes, Konate's injured. Matip's injured as well. But you looked at that 11 today, and actually from 1 to 11, it looked a fairly strong lineup. The bench, as we've said, looked weak, but just Mane going out of the team and Jota not being able to slot in because he's injured, all of a sudden, the team's the team, the whole dynamic of it looks very, very different.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't, you look at on paper, obviously Mane has come out, but Liverpool have signed Luis Diaz in January. He should be sort of attuned to the way that they play. Obviously, Darwin Núñez is suspended, and we'll see a lot more of him. And like you say, there's a few injuries there, but you look at that team on paper, and it should be a team that's capable of doing to Manchester United what Manchester United did to Liverpool. But I think it's hard to sort of pin it down to one thing, isn't it? But for me, the big thing at the moment, the big theme is that they just don't score first. And I think tonight was just a classic example, really, of the crowd, the protests, all the sort of things around tonight's game. If Liverpool score first there, they go on and they win that quite comfortably. The crowd turns against United. As it is, the opposite is the case. And I think that's, it's especially frustrating because going into this match that this is a big problem for Liverpool over the last sort of few months. That's been something that they've struggled with. But B, that it can turn. You've got that control. You've got that, ability. If Liverpool start well, it just sets the tone for the rest of it. Positive for them, negative for their opponents. It was something we spoke about all week going into this match of how important that would be. And they just seem to turn up almost. I don't know what it is. I don't want to call it arrogance or sort of whatever kind of word you're looking for. I'm not quite sure what it is, but they just turned up and seem to start very slowly. They seem to think that they're so much better that they can just sort of turn up and play themselves into it. And it was just never going to be the case tonight. I think that's the frustration, really. It's just so obvious that in these games, in these circumstances, Liverpool had to start quick. And they just didn't do that. Not one of them did it. You can go out and pick individuals. I thought Roberto Firmino was probably among the worst players and the worst in terms of the performers. But I don't think it's really fair to pick out one or two. It was just, front to back, it just wasn't anywhere near the levels really tonight. So that's the frustration. It's just such an obvious thing that is in their control and in their hands, and they just didn't do it.
Yeah, Trent's start to the season has been a bit worrying as well. But there's a number of people in the comment section saying one positive to take is Harvey Elliott, who is one of those youngsters who Jurgen Klopp's put a lot of trust in the midfield. And he did play well indeed himself within the game for Liverpool, but it just wasn't quite enough. I mean, he was probably about a 7, kind of where you'd expect Liverpool to be, and the rest were just so far below that probably did liven that up for Liverpool. The Naby Keita situation, as you say, Matt, as we understand it, injured, and that was the reason for pulling out of the game. But more question marks and more questions to be asked rather than answers.
Yeah, I mean, the full sort of situation is that we've seen all week reports from Germany that he's unhappy and he wants to move potentially before the end of this window. Obviously, Jurgen Klopp's response to that we saw in the embargo press conference from last night was essentially Klopp ruling that out, suggesting that it wouldn't be possible because Liverpool wouldn't be able to replace him at this point. And I think that is, completely a fair stance to take. But then inevitably, with all of the sort of speculation around him, there's going to be even more talk about it now because of the injury. Obviously, we have to take the line that he's injured at face value, but equally, I can understand why fans would get frustrated at that. And, if it is just an injury and it's nothing more than that in terms of his future and his contract and all the rest of it, then it just kind of sums up the situation really for Naby. He's never been able to get himself a consistent run of games, never been able to take the opportunities. We've listed off however many midfielders it is that Liverpool have lost, and it's a big opportunity now for him to come into the team, and he wasn't able to do that tonight because of this injury. So I think that just sums up why Liverpool would be reluctant really to give him a bigger role in the team. The suggestion from Sky Germany is that Naby Keita feels that a player of his quality should be getting more starts and more minutes, but I don't really think there's an argument to be made for that when at the same time as wanting that potentially or whatever it might be, he's never really sustained a period of fitness. So the fact that he missed tonight's game through injury, I don't think would be a massive surprise to anyone. It's something we've seen really for 4 seasons now at Liverpool inside the final 12 months of his contract. The next few weeks with Thiago in particular, I think Naby Keita is a kind of viable alternative really in that midfield to do a similar sort of job. We know, the injuries that Liverpool have got. It's just another missed chance really for him to come into the team and really put down a marker and show it. We've kind of, we've been desperate for that to happen for so long now at Liverpool. It just kind of feels a bit deja vu, doesn't it? It's a conversation we seem to have every other week. There's always someone injured, but then there's always Naby Keita, never far away from an injury himself. So, yeah, it'd be an interesting few days in terms of what happens with him and whether he gets back from this injury quickly or whatever. But yeah, it's just not great time. And again, it must be frustrating for him, I think. But I think from Liverpool's perspective as well, it equally must be the same sort of emotions around these things.
The frustration as well is how condensed this season is, obviously before the World Cup, 16 Premier League games to come. The amount of games, 5 in August in the Premier League that Liverpool do play. It's Bournemouth up next. I mean, that surely, all due respect to Bournemouth, though, for Liverpool's sake, has to be a first win of the new Premier League season. But with how it's going this season and how condensed it is, I mean, what is the solution? And is it wait until Thiago's back? Is it wait until Darwin Núñez's suspension's over, or when Diogo Jota's back? Because at the moment, you can see there are key pieces to the jigsaw missing for Liverpool. And it's probably, arguably, not even always as easy as just say, go and buy the players to fit in, because they're going to need to take time to probably adapt to what's being asked of them anyway.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, that's the argument that Jurgen Klopp, I'm sure, would make, is that he didn't expect to have all of these injuries. I think with some of them, with Thiago, for example, you kind of could have expected, if not straight away at the start of the season, it was going to happen at some point that he was going to miss a portion of games. There's certain other players in there as well that you'd have to put into the same sort of category. But I think Diogo Jota is one that has generally managed to stay fit, certainly at Liverpool. I know he had a few little injuries at Wolves at certain times and, in the previous portion of his career. But generally these players have stayed fit. I think Ibrahim Konate is another one who generally has had a decent injury record. He's had that one injury, of course, at Leipzig, but apart from that, has generally done pretty well in terms of that. So there are sort of one or two players really that Liverpool couldn't have predicted the injuries. They couldn't have expected all of those to come at the same time. But there are certain other ones where it's hardly a shock, is it, that certain players are missing? It's hardly a shock for Thiago, for Keita, even for Curtis Jones. On the evidence of last season, he does tend to get these injuries. It's just frustrating, really, I think, for Liverpool fans to see, it's very quickly gone from 8-9 midfielders to however many. The ones who are fit are not playing particularly well. It's quite easy for those frustrations to mount. And I don't know what the solution is. I don't think, I'd be very surprised if their transfer stance changed at this point, not least, because it would just look like such a panic buy. I think there's been players that have moved this summer that you think Liverpool could have gone and got. I think if they were going to go and do that, they would have done that already. So, yeah, it probably is just a case of waiting for a few of those players to come back from injuries. But at the same time, even when you do that, you know that as soon as Thiago comes back, it's only going to be a matter of time, unfortunately, on the evidence that we've seen so far, before he gets another one of these injuries and he's out for another portion of this season. So, yeah, it's there's no easy answer, is there? But I think particularly in midfield, it's hardly a surprise that there's one or two players who are a little bit injured. And when Jurgen Klopp asked earlier in the summer, what is it you want from a midfielder? I think everyone really in unison just sort of said, well, someone that can stay fit and be consistent throughout the season. So it's a legitimate question to ask. And I think those are the big questions really for Jurgen Klopp and for Liverpool tonight. One is around the transfers and the injury situation. The other is kind of around the slow starts and conceding first. I think those are two major questions that he's going to have to answer tonight. And he's not going to like doing that. He's been asked about it all summer. He's been very, very clear. But I think particularly after tonight, particularly after the start of this season, it's kind of unavoidable that those questions just simply have to be asked.
Yeah, those questions will be asked in his post-match press conference, which we'll bring to you here on the Blood Red channel, so do stick around for that. But from myself, Guy Clarke and Matt Addison, thanks for joining us for this edition of the Debrief. Unfortunately, it's ended in defeat for Liverpool at Old Trafford, going down by 2-1. But until next time, bye for now.